Ben Jackson, a young man feeling lost in life. Worried about his future, he enlists into the service to fight a war he never believed in. Life drastically changed once he had deployed to fight for his country against an enemy he wasn't even sure was his enemy. Against people that were as innocent as he was in committing any atrocities towards each other. Arriving in his hometown in the Oregon Valley, after multiple tours, what he thought he would achieve wasn't his path anymore. He was searching for something that would correct him on that course, to a future he was uncertain there would ever be an end result. A position not too far from his childhood home, working for the National Park Service as a park ranger, spoke to his nature. The state of his emotional well-being was something of concern to him now that things had changed, and the uncertainty of being within the confines of the normality of a life he would have in a city weighed on him, driving his choice for a more reclusive and quiet existence. His connection to the earth and for the natural landscape was something he cherished deeply from his childhood, but that he felt he had lost since growing up in such a severely demented environment on the other side of the world. This space, he felt, would provide him with a mental reboot, where his actions would be his own and with no one to have to answer for. His arrival to his post on the first day of his new job brought low enthusiasm, but the desire to be in the secluded environment made that factor less relevant. His 1990s Jeep Cherokee had seen better days, but if it could get him there, he would have little to no use for it once he arrived. His service vehicle would be his only means of transport, but he knew that his legs would be his main source of motion. In the hills of the Cascade Mountains, situated in the middle of nowhere, overlooking a vast valley surrounding the Columbia River, was where he would call home for as long as his post would allow him. His responsibilities would include fire patrol, camper guest assistance, and animal awareness training during the summer and fall months. As his Jeep drives up a dirt road into the hills, a well-constructed log ranger station would appear in the distance. It wasn't very large, but he knew he didn't really need much, so the size and scale didn't matter to him. He didn't need anything that would cater to someone seeking comfort or casual lifestyle. He wanted to be out in the woodlands, as much as his job would allow him. He pulls into his new world and begins to unpacking the limited belongings he had brought with him, and frankly the limited number of belongings he even owned. Rummaging through the back seat, he hears the door of the ranger station open and close behind him. The slight squeak of a screen door, followed by a somewhat gentle wooden door close, followed by the same slight squeak of the screen door. Wearing a park ranger uniform, holding a coffee mug, a woman, slightly older than him, steps out and leans against the railing at the top of the stairs. This didn't surprise Ben. He knew there would be someone to orient him, but he thought he was early enough to have a few moments to look around. Introducing herself as Ranger Pam Neely, she will be the closest ranger to his new post, and is there to show him around and familiarize him with his new... Taking initiative. Someone's eager to see our beautiful valley, says Pam. I'm not a big fan of rushing when late. I hate not being prepared, Ben says with a slight grunt as he grabs the last of his things from the... Well, look at you taking life seriously. I love it. Here, let me show you around, Pam says with a chuckle. Ben follows Pam into the ranger station. So you've got the bedroom area back there. Here's the stove and the kitchen set up for you. There's power, but it's not going to be strong enough to run anything too modern off of. Plug a laptop in and the whole thing will likely burn the place to the ground. Pam smirks. This is the radio station over here. I know a lot of previous rangers have moved things further from their sleeping quarters, but that's not really ideal when you're supposed to be keeping an eye on things. It's not really much, but she'll keep you warm and keep you safe from all the big, scary monsters out there, Pam says with another smirk and a little chuckle. The two proceed to walk back out to the front porch. Pam points off into the distance towards the head of the road Bennett drove up. I'm located a couple of miles that way, just over the crest of the mountain. I've got quite the setup going for myself. It's an old fire tower they converted. I lug my ass all the way up there, but when I get to the top, oh boy, can't beat that view. Pam takes a pause and breathes in. Now I can't see you from over there. The radio works pretty good out here, but there's always something going on messing with the thing. I guess it has something to do with the copper in the mountain or something, I don't know. So make sure to check your wires and everything. If you're really in a tough spot and you can't get it working, just fire a flare down that way. Aim as high as you can. There's a small camera set up back down towards the highway that'll pick it up. I've got that linked to me. If I see it, I'll head your way. Ranger Pam walks down the step to her ranger vehicle. As she's about to load herself in to take off, she turns back to Ben standing at the top of the stairs. She has a very hopeful look on her face. I hope you don't mind the silence. It gets pretty quiet up here. Worst you'll get is a dehydrated hiker, maybe a flat tire, or a pile of garbage laying on the road. Ben gives a half-hearted smile. I think I'll be able to handle it. Pam chuckles. Keep yourself busy. I'll come check in on you when I can. Pam closes the door and begins to back out, giving a friendly wave through the window as she takes off down the dirt road back towards the highway. Ben stands silent for a few moments, taking in his surroundings. He has an overwhelming feeling of relaxation, like he's finally able to breathe after all this time. He feels the calming of the winds and the silence from the lack of man. This will be good for him. After getting himself settled, Ben grabs his canteen and decides to go scope out his surroundings a little bit more thoroughly. As he leaves the ranger station in his new home, he takes a look around his immediate surroundings. His military training has taught him a lot, especially from being in such barren conditions for so long. He notices on the property a large pile of firewood covered in a tarp, a wooden outhouse nestled right next to where his vehicle is parked. There's not much here, but it's exactly what he was expecting. Ben heads down to the end of the driveway, where the road is. He looks back down towards the highway, his vision blocked entirely by the rolling hills of the mountainside. He turns his attention to the left, where he hasn't been. The road continues down as it meanders along the river down below. The valley can be incredibly steep and dangerous at times, with rocks or mudslides a common occurrence during the rainier months. He ventures out, wanting to stretch out his legs and back from his long drive. With his canteen in hand, he heads on foot down the dusty dirt road to scope out his new landscape. The road is lined with a high-faced mountainside, covered in large boulders and massive trees. Things that have been here as long as any civilization would have been, possibly even longer. On the other side, to his right, is at times a deadly-looking slope down to the riverbed below, with loose gravel, fallen old trees, and potholes from vehicles driving too fast lining the side of it. Gradually, the road begins to get lower into the valley, with the mountain growing immensely above him. Ben arrives at the mouth of the state park camping grounds. The road only continued on for a few more meters, and then becomes something a lot more reminiscent to bushwhacking through underbrush and forest than an actual path. He turns and walks past the welcome and warning signs at the front entrance to the campground. The majority of this area is covered in thick, massive hemlock trees, the ground littered with cones. He takes a nice stroll along each of the spaces. They have fire pits, despite there having been fire bans for years at this point, a relic from the grand camping adventures of the 80s and 90s. He can hear the rush of the river just ahead, where he walks out of the tree cover to an open field area for the campers to use for their recreation, playing lawn bowling, badminton, or just relaxing in the sun during the day. This area has a much larger fire pit that can be used while under his supervision. It's quiet now. The season will be opening in the next few days, but for now it's a peaceful, relaxing spot for anyone who is looking for serenity and silence. Ben sits down on the edge of the river to rest, before taking the long hike back up to the station. He takes a long, deep sip of his water and leans back on his elbows. The river rushing by at a moderate pace is the only sound he can hear. Soon this will be filled with kayakers, people floating down the river on tubes, or even the occasional fly fisherman. But for now, this is his piece, his spot. As he's sitting enjoying his newfound oasis, he hears a moderately large-sounding branch snap behind him to the left. He turns his head to take a small peek in the direction, shielding his eyes from the sun with his hand. A faint figure can be seen just beyond where the shadows start. He squints harder to get a better look at what it is. There wouldn't be anyone down here quite yet, but maybe it's Pam again. He turns more of his body around and sees a younger male deer. Not quite fully grown, hasn't quite grown its antlers yet. The beauty of nature that he's come to see is now right there for him to take in. He turns and gets up to his feet slowly and quietly. Now fully standing, he and the deer are locked in full eye contact. Ben notices there's absolutely no fear in the eyes of this young buck, almost as if there wasn't anything to worry about other than he and it. For fear of spooking it, he doesn't want to move too close, or too fast, but wants to get himself closer to the shade so he can see it in more detail. Ben walks in a small crescent to the right of the deer, so he's not approaching it head-on, not wanting to have it think he was going for it. He reaches the shadows of the trees and gets a full look at the amazing part of our natural world. Vital to the habitat of the area, and something he remembers quite fondly from his childhood backyard. A calming smile crosses his face as he is now standing, simply taking in the moment. Suddenly, without warning, a whistling or screeching noise approaches from behind him as a large-scale ballistic shoots past him, exploding the buck and shooting him backwards to the ground, slamming him down. His ears ringing, and muffled banter from an unknown source fill his head. Ben is shocked awake, clutching his canteen to the point he's made a small dent in it. The sun has almost completely set now, and it has begun to get colder. This relaxing hike down the valley has now set him up for a large hike back up to the station in the dark without any source of light. He lets out a quick "fuck" and proceeds to head back up the road. His pace hurries as sight lines become darker and darker from the lack of sun. He isn't necessarily afraid of his surroundings, but he knows the longer he's out here, the more likely it is he gets lost, or the longer it might take him to regain his directions if he is. As he approaches the peak where he can almost see the cabin, a very strange, unknown, and indescribable feeling falls over him. A feeling of unease or unrest. The hairs on his arms and neck stand up as he turns around to stare back down the road from where he came. With the sun setting behind the mountains to his back, there's almost no light to see anything. He lets out a quick "hello?" but it yields no return. Ben doesn't have time to stand out here looking for ghosts or monsters. He squints his eyes very tightly, trying to zero in on any movement he can see. He is uncertain, but there might be something down at the bottom, but without light guiding his vision, it could just be a figment of his imagination. Ben returns back to the ranger station, getting inside, turning on the lights. He prepares himself a quite simple meal, and he heads off to the bedroom to prepare for the next day, the day he would officially start his position. An uneventful night leads to a pretty uneventful first day, leads to a pretty uneventful first couple of days on the job. Tasks were completed, more of the landscape was discovered, and the job was as advertised. The final night before campers were slated to begin traveling to his valley was unseasonably humid, which led to a stressful evening attempting to get some well-needed rest. The small window above the bed wasn't doing much of anything to alleviate the heat. An hour or so of tossing and turning led Ben to peel himself from the sweaty top sheet and wander out into the living room area. After popping open the few windows that could open, he went to the front door. He would leave the wooden inside door propped open by a chair from the living room, just slightly enough to allow a breeze to flow through the cabin, while leaving the screen door shut to keep out unwanted scurrying guests that he had seen around during his time. With the door now open, he walks to the kitchen to get a quick drink of water before making another attempt to sleep. A long, deep drink of barely cool water from the tap and a large breath. He stands for a second, looking out the window across the valley. Complete and utter darkness as far as he could see. The large arboreal forest blocking out a large amount of the moon's light. He walks back past the front door towards his room at the back. But as he gets to the open door, a putrid smell wafts over him, filling his nose with the stench of musky, moldy air, stale like an unopened chest or dresser from 100 years ago. A small choke, and he walks to close the door. Could be possible a skunk sprayed near the cabin, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep smelling that. He closes the door, but is curious enough to open the screen door to take a quick look. He sees nothing. The next morning, He awakes after having an uncomfortable sleep. Groggy, he begins setting up for the day. In theory, he will be flooded with campers over the next several days, which will be the first human interactions he's had since the introduction with Ranger Pam. He's dressed and waiting out on the front porch of the cabin, cleaning off the fallen tree debris from the night before. He walks to the side of the cabin that's just slightly to the back, past the window in the kitchen. He looks down towards the campsite where he can faintly make out the fire pit and the river area. It's far enough away that he can't make out details, but close enough that the river's edge and mound of wood is recognizable. As he stands and looks, his eyes seem to catch a very small glimpse of something large, moving just past the edge of the tree line. His confusion leads to a feeling of stupidity. Had he already missed the first campers to arrive? That's pretty much his only job currently, and his training has always taught him to be prepared and punctual. A quick rush back into the cabin to grab his keys, he gets the Ranger Jeep. Not even bothering to close anything up, he heads down the winding road to the campsite. He's never late for anything, so how did he miss this? He pulls into the makeshift parking space just outside the entrance to the grounds and proceeds to walk into the forested-covered camping spots. A friendly hello yields no response, so he walks further in to investigate. He walks through the whole area until he wanders out into the open space where the fire pit and river are. Nothing. Not even a trace of campers. Ben takes his thumb and index fingers and rubs his eyes. He feels pretty worn out from the poor sleep he had the night before. He's obviously just anxious to get the camping season going so he can do his job. As he turns back to head to his vehicle, he hears a large splash over by the river. Sounded like something quite large, like a cannonball someone just did into the water. He gives another loud hello, but again no response. He walks past the fire pit and reaches the edge of the river. He takes a look both directions up and downstream, but there isn't anything. Could have been a fish, but it sounded so large. He starts taking a longer look, staring at the far bank and up the cliffside. Squinting his eyes in the morning sun, he sees no trace of human or animal. Just as he's doing that, he hears a car door slam shut behind him and faint chatter. Ben takes one final look at the river, then walks back towards the entrance. As he approaches, he sees a group of middle-aged young people all standing next to their cars. They're unpacking brand new camping equipment, all things that would appear to have been purchased recently. Weekend warriors. He'd heard this term before, but he didn't really know what it meant. Unpacking all of their things, they check in with Ben. They're set to stay for the week in the two spaces closest to the river. They exchange pleasantries, and Ben gives them the rundown of the guidelines regarding the fire pit, the road access, and all things safety by the book he had been taught. They don't seem like there will be any trouble. Ben says goodbye and heads back to his vehicle to head back up to the station to wait for anyone else heading in. He arrives back at the cabin feeling uneasy about what happened. His thought process was very much scattered. He doesn't spook very easily, but for some unknown reason he's on edge. Upon arrival back at the station, he sees that he's left in such a rush that the front door is still wide open. After parking and getting out, the disgusting, pungent odor hits him hard again. He can feel it in the back of his throat. This time it somehow seems worse than last night. He grabs a bandana from the truck and wraps it around his mouth and nose. An investigation into the immediate surroundings of the station leads to no evidence of a skunk, anything rotting or decaying, but the smell still lingers. Walking back up to the front door, something is bothering him. The screen door is open a little bit too far, like it's been pushed all the way back open, past the limits of its hinges. It's not broken, but it seems like it's been clumsily opened in a haste. Ben gives a stern, "Hello, this is the park ranger, can I help you?" He hears nothing back. He moves to the screen door back into where it should be, checking to see if it's still working in its original intention. He closes the door and enters the station, closing the door behind him. His shoes feel gritty. He takes a look down at a mess of dry dirt from the road. that seems to only be directly inside the front door. The smell is stale in the air around him. This isn't a fresh odor. But how old can it be? He's only been gone for less than an hour. An investigation into the entire cabin leads to no leads. Ben shakes his head in confusion, removes his hat and the bandana, wiping away the sweat on his face. An afternoon of prep work for the coming week is a distraction, but the feeling of unease stays with him while he works. Later that evening, as the night begins to get dark, Ben drives down to the campgrounds to assist the campers with the evening campfire. As the evening draws on, Ben prepares for a well-needed night of rest, after having been unable to sleep much the night before. Tonight is much cooler, and makes him hopeful for a good night's sleep. Settled in, it takes him no time at all. He's out like a light as soon as he gets comfortable. Falling asleep and staying asleep are two very different concepts. Despite being fast asleep, his mind is racing, his dreams vivid and unsettling. His mind telling him of someone watching, surveying. The specifics of details and locations are confusing in his mind. The comfort of sleep is slowly disrupted as his mind racing leads to tossing and turning. There's a single moment where it seems like he can finally settle again. The faint sound of a scream startles him from his sleep. Already on the verge of wake, this noise was loud enough to push him over the edge. Fumbling and stumbling awake, he gets out of bed. The confusion setting in as he rushes out into the kitchen. He looks out over the valley, but he sees nothing. The squeak of the screen door opening and then closing as he rushes out the front door onto the porch. He heads to the back of the cabin to look down towards the campground. There's too much silence considering what he just heard. This might be a figment, a fragment of something he's heard in the past, causing him to wake in a state of panic. He stands silently on the porch, waiting to see if there's anything else. He hears a very subtle and faint rumbling noise. Heading down, back around to the front of the ranger station, he steps barefoot onto the front path. As he heads closer to the road, the two cars of the campers come racing past him, so fast that it seems like they were a blur. Ben runs out to the road as he sees taillights disappear around the corner of the road. He's experienced frantic behavior before, but nothing quite like this. Not even fully awake, he runs back up to the porch to take another look down at the campgrounds. It's of course completely dark, so it's not like he can see anything. Standing there looking down the direction, he's uncertain of what actions he should take. This is such a weird situation, and he's only been on the job for a few weeks. Does he head down to investigate? Does he hop into the ranger vehicle and try to catch up with them? Does he call Ranger Pam in the middle of the night? After a few moments of regaining his composure, he decides that he'll wait for sunrise and head down to investigate. There's no point in wandering out in the dark, especially as unprepared as he is in the middle of the night. The rest of the evening and into the early hours of the morning are restless. Ben paces the walls of the small cabin, his mind coming up with all sorts of scenarios. He can feel the exhaustion of being awoken in such a state, but there's no chance he could sleep now. As the first rays of sunlight begin to appear over the rolling mountains, Ben gets himself prepared for a trip down to the grounds. He loads up the ranger vehicle and drives the winding dirt road. As he approaches, he turns his vehicle around to situate it facing back up the road. His precaution and situational awareness is something that is forever ingrained into his habits. He exits the vehicle and tentatively approaches the campsite. Every step, it seems like it takes seconds as he approaches the large, open area towards the river. The light is gaining every moment, but the trees are blocking out a large portion of it. He reaches the area where the campers had spent the evening. Much to Ben's surprise, everything is still there. Tents, folding chairs, food, clothing, all just sitting there as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment but would be right back. There wasn't any sign of anything unusual, The place looked pristine with all the brand new camping supplies, like it was right out of a magazine shoot. After surveying the area, Ben takes a walk towards the river's edge. As he approaches the water, he notices a yellow woman's puffer jacket that is unnaturally propped up on some shrubs. Definitely placed there with intention. As he gets closer to it, the haunting smell is vaguely in the air. This time not quite as pungent as before, but it's present. He picks up the jacket to examine it. There was some very minor abrasions or scuffing on the arm. However, outside of that, there didn't seem to be anything unusual. Ben folds the jacket over his arm and turns back towards the campsite, heading back down towards his vehicle. His plan was to head back up and call Ranger Pam. His training didn't really prepare him for whatever this was. As he takes his first few steps away from the river, he hears a large splash in the river. The same large-sounding splash that he heard the very first day he arrived. Startled, he drops the jacket and whips back around towards the water. Ben yells loudly, "Get out of here!" He's not quite sure why, but that's what came out of his mouth. He takes the few steps back to the water to see what could have made the noise. He looks up and down both sides of the river, and much like the first time, nothing. He takes a look up on the side of the embankment on the other side of the river, leading up into the trees. As he's peering up, another large splash and clunking happens just off to his left, followed by a light splash of river water up onto his face. Something had landed on the river's edge just to the side of him. Pushing his way through some tall grass, Ben decides to go over to where the sound was. As he's digging through the greenery, he finds a large, hand-sized rock just sitting conspicuously out of the water. Not heavy, but definitely heavier than he could throw. He picks up the rock and walks back over towards where he dropped the jacket. As he gets back around the shrubbery, he sees that the jacket is gone. It's nowhere to be seen. It's absolutely impossible, because he knew exactly where he was standing when he heard the splash. Or at least he thought he knew. Thinking to himself, what the hell is going on? Ben shouts out again, "Hey, whoever is out there had better come out. I'm a U.S. Park Ranger. Show yourself now." He gets no response. Ben feels absolutely crazy. No sleep, panic campers, weird occurrences. He's had almost enough of this. He mutters to himself, "Fuck it," and hurriedly turns back through the campgrounds to his vehicle. He races back up to the ranger station, slams his way through the front door, and heads right for the radio. Tuning the frequency, Ben attempts to get in contact with Ranger Pam. "Hello? Pam, come in?" Nothing. He changes frequencies. "Ranger Pam, are you there? Come in?" Again, nothing. Ben fiddles with it a bit more. As he's checking over the setup, he hears a loud noise approaching from the highway. He pops his head up from the radio just as several large vehicles go racing past the station and down to the campgrounds. He didn't get a good look, but they all appeared to be trucks with several people riding in them. He takes a look out the window, looking towards the road, but they're gone from sight. As he's peering out the window, the radio crackles. "Are you there? What the heck is going on over there?" Pam's voice cuts through the silence. Ben runs back over to the radio and picks it up. "You might want to get over here. I have no idea what's going on." "Yeah, I just saw on the camera. It looks like trouble. I'm on my way." Ben grabs his stuff and hops into his truck and heads back down towards the campsite.